Hello, Tributes, and welcome back to episode 12 of Ashes of the Hunger Games. This is my third attempt to record this, because my screen recording app, crashed the last time I did it. And the thing is, I was so close to the end. I was like halfway through the 220th games. Yeah, so that's crazy, but I'm hoping that it works this time. Here's to hoping that the lag induced by the 743 slides of this slideshow does not mess up my screen recorder. But anyways, today we'll be going over the 201st to 225th Hunger Games. Before I begin, I would like to thank Christian Blanco and Lauren McCouch for making Tales of the Hunger Games and Pan Am Reborn, respectively. I would also like to thank Andrew McLean for making the art used in this video. Without those people, these videos would A, not exist, and B, be so boring and just walls of text. You don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. So, art's in the background. So anyways, yeah, before I begin, I'd also like to make a few disclaimers. So the 201st games, the pre-game stuff is written out, but that is the only time that it is, because some very important stuff for the lore of Pan Am happens in there. Also, I would like to say that this is probably going to be one of the longest videos on this channel, because that time that I was recording when it crashed, when I was halfway through the 220th games, it was recording for almost 3 hours. So, it's going to be like a feature-length film of me just narrating these games. But anyways, yeah, another thing, one of the victors makes a kinda racy comment towards the last person they kill. So I'm not gonna read that out loud. If y'all want to look into what he actually says, go ahead and do that. But I'm not gonna read it out loud, because I don't want that to be misconstrued as me being racy. But anyways, yeah, let's get into the games. Let's do it. After last year's highly successful quell, the training centers in each of the career districts were shut down. The new trains were held back at the train yard in the capital, and a mysterious zoo was rented out this year. As small-scale rebellions went on in the career districts for the training academies being closed, victors were also being paid to illegally train certain children. This year's victor had his parents pay Jack himself to train him. This year, Districts 4 and 12 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 10 and 12 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are the mentors for the 201st Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's victor was 15-year-old Ashbrook Felders from District 7. Ashbrook was a pretty well-known figure within District 7, being the ex-best friend of Birch Kim, victor of the 196th Hunger Games. After Birch's older sister had beaten him within an inch of his life one day, just for being gay, he cut all ties with Birch, although he was notably quite proud of Birch when she had won. Although the training academies were shut down, it was surprising when the career districts were still allowed to do their normal volunteer ceremonies. Ashbrook and his twin sister Ashbrook were 2 of the 70 total volunteers this year from this district, 35 boys and 35 girls. Ashbrook and a 13-year-old boy named Tyrone immediately stood out to the judges of the volunteer ceremony, both being the youngest male volunteers but the most accurate at axe throwing. During the interview round, the judges were the surviving victors of the district: Kiri, Jason, Jack, Evora, Hollis, and Birch. The 6 victors would be unforgiving when asking their questions, asking very intense and usually difficult questions, trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. Out of all of the males and females to make it to the interview stage, Ashbrook and Ashbrook would be the only tributes able to answer all of these questions, making them the tributes for District 7 this year. After Ashbrook and Ashbrook were announced as this year's tributes for District 7, it was time for the visitations. Ashbrook would be visited by his his older sister, Ashley. Ashley would hug Ashbrook tight, hoping it wouldn't be the last time she would get to do so. Although Ashley was scared, she knew Ashbrook had the proper training because of their parents paying Jack an exorbitant amount of money to train him. Eventually, peacekeepers would come into the room to escort Ashley out of the room and escort Ashbrook onto the train. As the tributes were taken to the train, they were surprised to see that instead of a magnificent train waiting for them, they were shoved into a cattle car with most other tributes. This freaked out Ashbrook, and Ashbrook, being surrounded by outliers. Soon enough, Christopher from 10, McBee from 10, Callum from 12, Christian from 12, Rihanna from 12, and Leah from 12 would approach the pair from 7 and state that they don't think their mentors will be on this train, Callum stating that the capital wouldn't put the victors through this shit. As the victors got to the capital, they were forced out of the cattle car by peacekeepers, the career tributes being angry about how they were being treated, with Donovan from 2 even spouting that his father would be hearing about this and that his father paid their checks. Meanwhile, Toby from 3 and Nate from 5 both started to freak out, stating that the capital was sending them back in time. Most tributes didn't understand this, but soon the careers understood. Ashbrook remembering watching the first 10 games during his illegal training in the past year. The tributes would be taken to a truck which would take them to where they would be staying. At this point, the careers and the tributes from 3 and 5 knew that they wouldn't be taken to the extravagant accommodation tower, although the boy from 15 and Phoenix from 11 were especially confused about what was going on. As the truck came to a stop, the tributes who knew what was about to happen braced for what was to come, while the confused tributes stayed stock still, not knowing what was going on. As the tributes were dumped into a zoo enclosure, Ava from 1 and Tyler from 1 fell directly into a pile of horse dung, almost throwing up as they stood up. Meanwhile, Caleb from 2 and Tiberius from 4 laughed at the ones, although most other tributes were too busy thinking about how the pre-games would be done this year to be paying attention to what was happening to the ones. After a few hours, the mentors of the districts came to the bars of the enclosure along with the district stylists. It was seen that after the events of last year's tribute parade and interviews, the peacekeeper presence around Elise and Sasha was more extreme, and a new stylist was appointed for District 15, no one knowing what happened to Rosaline. As Ashbrook and Ashbrook saw Jack and Birch, they immediately ran over to the bars of the enclosure to talk to them. It was revealed that all of the pregame stuff would still be done this year, and so the tributes would be temporarily taken out of the zoo enclosure in order to get their measurements done and decide what design they want in the tribute parade. Ashbrook and Ashbrook would end up agreeing on an autumn leaf-inspired outfit. Although this same design was used last year, Ashbrook argued that he thought he'd be able to make the colors look even better on him than even Jasira and Figs did last year. When the tributes were all put back into the enclosure, it was noted by the other couriers that Caleb and Donovan would talk in hushed tones to Kayla from 6 and Gilligan from 6. When Caleb gave Gilligan something covered in a cloth, it was seen by Ashbrook, and he was immediately curious on what the item was. He would spend the rest of the time before the tribute parade trying to figure out what the item was, to no avail. Before the tribute parade, Naomi from 4 and Megan from 4 would compliment the Felders twins on their outfits for the parade. This would cause Ashbrook and Ashbrook to blush simultaneously and thank the girls from 4 before the chariots were called out of the tunnel, causing Naomi and Megan to rush back to the District 4 chariot. About halfway down the road of the tribute parade, something unexpected happened. In a matter of seconds, Gilligan took out the cloth and revealed what was under it: a gun. He then aimed at Tobias Flickerman himself and shot him directly in the head. Just then, a smoke bomb was thrown down, giving the tributes the perfect chance to escape. The smoke from the smoke bomb engulfed the tributes from Districts 5 through 9. This confused Ashbrook and Ashbrook, and they just looked around as gunshots and ricocheting bullets sounded all around them. As the smoke dissipated, the damage was revealed to all the tributes around the area. The gunshots shot into the smoke had killed Nate from 5, Kayla from 6, Gilligan from 6, Johnny from 8, and Autumn from 9. The shots had also killed a few tributes outside the smoke, these tributes being the girl from 10 and Tiberius from 4. After this, all of the tributes were forced back to the zoo enclosure, with interim president Maximilian Monner deciding that the rest of the pre-games events would be cancelled, keeping the safety of the capital citizens in mind. That night, as the couriers talked, Ashbrook noticed his sister acting odd, as if she was in pain. Eventually, Ashbrook couldn't be able to hide it anymore, showing the other couriers that she was hit by one of the ricocheting bullets in her stomach. This scared the other couriers, but without medical supplies, the 12s couldn't help her. The next day, as the tributes were waking up to be taken to the arena, the other couriers noticed that Ashbrook was not waking up. As couriers tried to wake her up, Ashbrook tried his best not to cry, knowing Ashbrook wouldn't wake up no matter how hard they tried. Eventually, it was revealed by the peacekeepers in the area that Ashbrook had died in the night. This year's games took place in the old amphitheater. The weather was a downpour of rain, the main event was a 2-day-long tornado, the games lasted for 5 days, and the notable months were rainbow snakes. As the tributes were being taken into the arena, Ashbrook finally burst into tears after the loss of his twin sister. He then remembered something. He remembered what he had seen before the tribute parade the day before, that he tried to figure out what was under that cloth, that Caleb had given Gilligan the cloth. It was all Caleb's fault she was dead. It was all her fault. As Ashbrook thought about this, his eyes started to twitch, and he turned his head quickly to look at Caleb, giving her an intense glare, letting Caleb know that he knew what she had done. When the gong sounded, Ashbrook was one of only 6 tributes to run into the cornucopia, along with Leah, Rihanna, Christian, McBee, and Caleb. As soon as Ashbrook got to the cornucopia, he grabbed a throwing axe and immediately threw it at Caleb, hitting her in the skull, sounding her cannon. Ashbrook then looked at the other couriers who had run into the cornucopia with him. Leah, Rihanna, Christian, and McBee would be scared until Ashbrook explained why he had killed Caleb, which seemed to make the other couriers in the area a little more understanding. None of the tributes thought the games would last past sundown. especially after what had happened during the tribute parade. So, when the sun went down, most tributes had to find shelter within the tunnels, while Ashbrook and the rest of the careers would set up a fire and camp out by the cornucopia. Not a lot happens on the second day, only one tribute dying. This tribute was the boy from 11, who was killed by Joseph from 9. It was at that point that the game makers decided to make an arena event occur to push tributes closer. As Ashbrook and the other living careers started to feel the wind whipping around them and see a funnel cloud forming in the sky, the careers immediately got up and ran into the tunnels, knowing what was about to happen. As the tornado touched down, most of the tributes were inside in the tunnels. The only tribute still outside was Kenzie from 8, who was immediately sucked into the tornado and killed. Meanwhile, in the tunnels, Ava, Donovan, Naomi, Megan, Ashbrook, McBee, and Callum split off from the other careers so that the two groups could search a bigger radius for tributes. Ashbrook and his group ended up killing the girl from 3, the girl from 5, both tributes from 14, and both tributes from 15. After this, as the group was walking back to reunite with the other careers, Donovan took Ashbrook to the side. Donovan then smirked and admitted that it was his idea to get the 6s to kill President Flickerman, and he somehow managed to get Khalib to take the fall for it. This immediately angered Ashbrook, and he yelled at Donovan, stating that it was his fault that Ashbrook was dead. Donovan would reply that it was his fault Ashbrook was dead, in a tone of voice that made it seem as though he was proud of that fact. Ashbrook would then run at Donovan and attack him, being angry at him for being at fault for the death of his twin sister. As this happened, Naomi and Megan dove between the boys, stating that they needed to save that anger for the finale. Although Ashbrook didn't like Donovan, he couldn't lie that Naomi and Megan were right. As the group reunited with the other careers, Ashbrook immediately told Leah, Rihanna, Christian, and McBee about what Donovan had told him. McBee would state that Donovan deserved to be killed for what he had done to so many innocent tributes, while Leah correctly stated that those tributes would have had to die anyways. Ashbrook then stated that he was not going to stay with the careers if they didn't do anything about Donovan soon. At that point, both McBee and Christian agreed to join him if he left. Therefore, it was decided that the trio would leave during their watch that night. After the trio left the larger career group, Ashbrook already missed the girls from 4, as he thought both of the girls were gorgeous. Ashbrook would say this to McBee and Christian, to which McBee would state that if they didn't want to leave with them, they had already picked their side. Christian would fear the way that McBee was talking about the situation as if it were a war, but he couldn't do anything about it. After another day of the tornado raging outside, the skies outside finally cleared up on day 4. As this occurred, 6 cannons went off. These cannons belonged to Naomi from 4, Megan from 4, Rihanna from 12, Leah from 12, Callum from 12, and Christopher from 10. These kills occurred when Ava, Tyler, and Donovan turned on the other careers. This meant that only 9 tributes were left at the start of day 4. These 9 tributes were Ava from 1, Tyler from 1, Donovan from 2, Toby from 3, Ashbrook from 7, Joseph from 9, McBee from 10, Phoenix from 11, and Christian from 12. Once this was realized by the trio, they decided to stick together in order to be able to take down Donovan and the Ones. As the trio decided to stick together, Ashbrook led them out to where he thought the Ones and Donovan would be. As Ashbrook, McBee, and Christian arrived at the cornucopia, they saw Ava, Tyler, and Donovan. Just then, they saw another trio sneaking up on Ava, Tyler, and Donovan. This trio was made of Toby, Joseph, and Phoenix. As a fight broke out between the trios, Ashbrook, McBee, and Christian would watch this fight go down, being surprised when Joseph managed to kill Donovan before being killed by Ava. Out of all the fighters in the fight between the Careers and Outliers, only Ava survived. Just then, as the sun began to set, Ashbrook, McBee, and Christian dove out into the cornucopia opening. Ava would laugh at the trio of boys, asking if this was seriously her competition. The chickens who ran away as soon as even a hint of opposition hit them. As Ava was saying this, all Ashbrook had to do was take his throwing axe out and throw it at Ava's head. Ashbrook would actually do this, sounding Ava's cannon. The only tributes that were left at this point were Ashbrook, McBee, and Christian. As the boys realized this, they stepped back from each other, not wanting to make the first move. Just then, as the boys were thinking, something snapped inside of Ashbrook. Ashbrook knew what he had to do. Taking his throwing axe from the body of Ava, Ashbrook then threw his axe at McBee, hitting him in the head, sounding his cannon. Ashbrook would then be unarmed. As Christian realized this, he ran at Ashbrook and tackled him to the ground, beginning to choke him out. As Ashbrook began to lose consciousness, he reached to the side and grabbed the knife that McBee had grabbed from the cornucopia way back during the bloodbath, and stabbed it into the side of Christian's head, sounding his cannon. As Christian's cannon sounded and Ashbrook's victory was announced, Ashbrook lost consciousness. Peacekeepers would need to come into the arena in order to get Ashbrook out of the arena and get him to the hospital. After his victory, Ashbrook would spend 5 months in hospital, getting his victory tour and interview canceled because of it. As he was in the hospital, he fell in love with one of his doctors, Caesar Cardew. After being released from the hospital, Ashbrook would finally start talking to Birch again. Ashbrook and Birch's friendship would come back in full swing after Birch apologized profusely for what her sister used to do to him. Eventually, Ashbrook would ask Caesar out on a date, to which he said yes. Although there was a 15-year age difference, Ashbrook had just turned 18 by the time he asked Caesar out. Eventually, Ashbrook and Caesar would get married, and the pair would adopt 4 kids together, 2 boys and 2 girls. None of these kids would compete in future games, although these kids were kept out of the public eye and aren't even named in the files. It was also at this time that the elections for the next presidential Pan Am were held, electing 14-year-old Belladonna Caliban. Belladonna would promise even more interesting games during her time as president. After last year's games, the Capitol loved the idea of the nostalgia year. The career districts were also happy when the training academies opened back up in the later months of the year. This year's victor was loved by many in the Capitol, being the second ever non-binary victor. This year, Districts 1 and 12 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 10 and 14 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are all the mentors for the 202nd games. Read at your own leisure. This year's games took place in a pyramid. The weather was light rain. The main event was a heat wave. The games lasted for 7 days, and the notable nuts were mummies. This year's victor was 18-year-old Mitochondrian Eisenhower from District 12. Mitochondrian is a pretty well-known figure within District 12, being one of the only non-binary people to volunteer this year in this district. Mitochondrian was one of the strongest citizens in District 12 as well, being known for taking down anyone who faced them in the boxing ring in the training academy. Before the gong even sounded, 5 tributes had immediately stepped off of their podiums, these 5 having formed a suicide pact together. After the girl from 3, the boy from 3, the girl from 5, the boy from 5, and the girl from 14 had jumped off of their podiums, the gong sounded. As the gong sounded, Mitochondrian was one of the only tributes to leave their podium, choosing to run towards the cornucopia with Mika from 1, Frederick from 2, and Alfred from 14. Whilst the other tributes stayed stock still on their podiums, not having expected the Smarties to jump off of their podiums early like that. As Mitochondrian got to the cornucopia, they grabbed a sword and immediately decapitated Alfred, making him the first kill of the games this year. Meanwhile, Mitochondrian's only ally, Mika, stabbed her spear into Frederick's head, sounding his cannon. As Mitochondrian and Mika reunited with each other, the pair ran away from the cornucopia with a bounty of resources the pair had grabbed. As the days went on, Mitochondrian and Mika would form a close bond. Mitochondrian and Mika would cuddle each night for warmth. Eventually, Mika would admit that she had feelings for Mitochondrian before kissing them. This action would change the pair's relationship for the rest of the games. On the dawn of the 6th day, 10 tributes still remained. These 10 tributes were Mika from 1, Diamond from 1, Jeweler from 1, Michelle from 2, Milfred from 9, Cleve from 10, Hoffer from 10, Mitochondrian from 12, Ashling from 14, and Malcolm from 15. As the day went on, the heat in the arena became unbearably hot. Mitochondrian and Mika would go inside the pyramid, trying to find shelter from the heat. As they waited inside, they heard 5 cannons throughout the day. These cannons belonged to Diamond, Jeweler, Michelle, Hoffer, and Malcolm. This left the top 5. Mika from 1, Milfred from 9, Cleve from 10, Mitochondrian from 12, and Ashling from 14. As this realization hit Mitochondrian, he knew what he had to do. As the pair kissed, Mitochondrian would plunge their sword directly into Mika's heart, killing her immediately. Later that night, Mitochondrian would try to sleep, not being able to after what they had done to Mika. As Mitochondrian struggled to sleep, they heard a pair of footsteps nearby. These footsteps belonged to Milfred and Ashling, who had been in an alliance with the other, which had been an alliance that the other careers feared. As Mitochondrian ducked behind a pillar, they realized that this could be their only chance to get rid of some big competition and get into the top 2. Before the pair got to Mitochondrian's position, Mitochondrian picked up Mika's spear and ducked back behind the pillar. They would then watch as Milfred and Ashling stepped into their line of sight. As the pair did this, Mitochondrian launched the spear into the strongest of the pair, Milfred's heart, killing him immediately. Mitochondrian then stepped out from behind the pillar, showing themselves to Ashling. Mitochondrian then ran at Ashling. Before they could get to Ashling, however, the pair heard something in the distance. Just then, a mummy came into the area and chased the pair. As the pair ran, Ashling tripped and screamed out for help. Mitochondrian would look back at Ashling before running back to her and helping her up. The pair would then run to the cornucopia together. As Mitochondrion and Aisling arrived at the cornucopia, Mitochondrion helped Aisling get on top of the cornucopia, and then Aisling returned the favor, helping Mitochondrion up onto the cornucopia. As Mitochondrion and Aisling watched the mummies swarm the bottom of the cornucopia, Aisling grabbed Mitochondrion's hand out of fear. Just then, someone attacked. As the pair watched the mummies, Cleve came out of hiding, throwing her throwing knife into Aisling's leg, causing her to scream out in pain and fall to the ground. As Mitochondrion saw Aisling fall, they ran at Cleve, sword in hand. Cleve would laugh at this and take out another knife, ready to throw it. As Cleve threw her last knife, Aisling dove in between the pair, getting hit in the heart by the knife, killing her immediately. As this occurred, Mitochondrion continued to run at Cleve, now having nothing between them and her. As Mitochondrion got to Cleve, they swiftly stabbed Cleve in the stomach. This would cause Cleve to fall to the ground in pain, and she would grab her stomach in pain, feeling something warm in her hands. As Cleve looked down, to her horror, she noticed that her intestines were falling out through the hole in her stomach caused by Mitochondrion. She cursed before fainting, sounding her cannon and making Mitochondrion the victor this year. After their victory, Mitochondrion would be killed in District 1 during their victory tour. The capital would try anything they could think of in order to find out who had killed Mitochondrion, even offering $1 million to whoever could find the killer. But no killer would be found until the 250th Hunger Games. After last year's games, the death of Mitochondrion was still being investigated, although nothing had come up by this time. This year's victor would be another non-binary victor and would be loved by many in the capital. This year, Districts 8 and 15 would be picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 2 and 4 would be picked to send in the extra male tribute. These are the mentors for the 203rd Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. Thank you. This year's games took place in a cave. There was no weather because it's the cave. It's inside the cave. The main event was a flood. The games lasted for 3 days, and the notable months were skin-eating ants. This year's victor was 17-year-old Legend Fairweather from District 1. During the bloodbath, Legend watched as Alvin from 11 killed 7 tributes with a scythe. This would make Legend realize that the Outlier Alliance, composed of the tributes from Districts 3, 9, 11, 14, and 15, would be the most fearsome alliance this year. As Legend watched Alvin's killing spree, they didn't notice that Eloise from 15 was sneaking up on them. As Eloise got up behind Legend, she prepared to swing her sword into Legend's back, but her sword was caught halfway through its swing by Darius from 2. Darius then broke Eloise's arm and then snapped her neck, grabbing her sword and then alerting Legend to what was happening. Legend would then notice what had happened behind them, and Legend would run away from the cornucopia, being allowed to do this by Darius, who went on to kill the boy from 15 before being killed by Nadia from 15. As the days went on, Legend would stay on his own, as he had elected to do during training. About halfway through the second day, it was already down to the top 10. The top 10 consisting of Contura from 1, Legend from 1, Elon from 3, Condor from 5, Chicago from 6, Crinoline from 8, Sorella from 9, Blush from 11, Alvin from 11, and Nadia from 15. As Legend realized this, they heard a footstep behind them. Just then, Contora stepped out with her hands in the air, showing she was unarmed. Legend would notice this, also displaying that they were unarmed as well. As the pair from one caught up with what each other had done in the arena, Contora stated that she had been following the Outlier Alliance and taking their water and food every now and then in order to survive, to which Legend commented that this action was indeed smart, which made Contora smile and blush a little. At midnight, as the fallen were shown in the sky, Contora kissed Legend. The pair would then get intimate, as the portraits of the fallen tributes were shown in the sky. As the pair were getting intimate, they heard 3 cannons in the distance. These cannons belonged to Sorella, Blush, and Alvin, after Elon and Nadia had turned on the trio, killing them. Just before the pair could finish up, Elon and Nadia burst into the camp of the Ones. The pair from One then stood up and prepared to fist fight the only remaining outliers from the Outliers Alliance. The pair from One would run at Elon and Nadia, ready to fight. Legend would tackle Elon to the ground, while Contora tackled Nadia to the ground. As the pairs fought, the tunnels of the cave started to flood. The pair from One would hold Elon and Nadia's heads under the water while trying to stay above the water themselves. Once Elon and Nadia's cannon sounded, the pair from One swam over to the cornucopia. As the pair waited for their final opponents, 2 cannons sounded in the distance, as Crinoline had turned on Condor and Chicago, downing them both simultaneously. As these cannons sounded, Legend knew what they had to do. They kicked Contora in the throat before kicking her off of the cornucopia roof, causing her to quickly get swallowed by the currents of the water, drowning her. As Legend continued to wait for Crinoline, another cannon sounded. This cannon was revealed to belong to Crinoline, as she was unable to make it to the cornucopia before being swallowed up by the currents of the water, making Legend the victor. After their victory, Legend returned to District 1, where he would teach hand-to-hand combat in the training academy in the district. Legend would eventually meet a gorgeous young woman in the district named Luminescence Callisto. Luminescence and Legend would end up getting married at the age of 20 during the 206th Hunger Games, and adopting 6 children together. 5 girls and a boy. None of these children would ever compete in the Hunger Games, although their descendants would. After last year's games, the Capitol wanted more fun victors like the past few years. Lucky for the Capitol, this year's victor would be one of the youngest tributes this year, beating the odds when he won. This year, Districts 1 and 11 would be picked to send in the extra female tribute, and Districts 12 and 15 were picked to send in the extra male tribute. Now, before I begin, this is the games I warned you about, with the racy comment towards the end in the finale. So, I won't read it, but I'll let y'all read it. But anyways, here's the mentors for the 204th games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a jail. The weather was thunderstorms. The main event was an annoying alarm. The games lasted for 8 days and there were no notable musts. This year's victor was 15-year-old Granite Forex from District 1. On the last year before head game maker Leviathan Alfayed's retirement, Leviathan wanted to make a games that would be unforgettable. This year's games would definitely be unforgettable, as this year's games would have only automatic weapons in the cornucopia. When the gong sounded, Granite ran into the cornucopia with his district partner, Allison, aged 18. Granite would grab a pistol while Allison grabbed an AK. The pair then went back to back and shot at tributes as they ran at the cornucopia. After the bloodbath, 10 tributes had died to the pair from 1, including Brandon from 2 and Don Ladd from 4, although those 2 kills were by accident. After the bloodbath, Granite and Allison met up with Celeria from 1 and Sabine from 2, and the group ran away from the cornucopia. As the day went on, Granite would try to flirt with Sabine, who was just a year older than him. As this happened, Allison and Celeria would laugh at this, thinking Granite didn't have a chance with Sabine. So, when Sabine kissed Granite, Allison and Celeria were definitely surprised. At midnight, the portraits of Brandon from 2, both tributes from 3, Don Ladd from 4, both tributes from 5, the boy from 6, the boy from 7, and both tributes from 10, all were shown in the sky, all of which were killed by Allison and Granite during the bloodbath. While the portraits of the fallen were being shown, Sabine and Granite would start to kiss again. Allison and Celeria would roll their eyes at this and decided to go out for a walk and hunt for tributes, giving Sabine and Granite some alone time. As Granite and Sabine continued to kiss, Sierra from 4 came out from around the corner and shot Sabine in the back, causing her to fall onto Granite. As Granite tried to get Sabine off of him, he saw Sierra preparing to shoot him, causing Granite to scream. Before Sierra could shoot Granite, Allison and Celeria came around the corner and Celeria tackled Sierra to the ground as Allison got Sabine's body off of Granite. After Granite stood up, he looked down at Sabine's then dead body before looking over at Sierra. At this point, Sierra was terrified. Both Celeria and Allison decided to let Granite get the kill. As Granite took out his pistol, he glared down at Sierra while aiming at her before pulling the trigger. On the dawn of the 8th day, it was down to the top 5 tributes. The top 5 consisted of Allison from 1, Celeria from 1, Granite from 1, Skylar from 11, and Nora from 15. As the tributes were stirring awake from their short sleep due to the alarm event last night, Granite shot up from his slumber after having a nightmare about what had happened to Sabine during the first night. As Granite woke up, he was the first tribute remaining to realize he was in the top 5. He decided that, as his district partners slept, he'd kill them. And so, Granite took out his pistol and was about to shoot Allison before being shot in the shoulder by a sniper rifle. Granite yelped in pain and ran to hide as this sniper went on to kill Allison and Celeria for Granite. As Granite watched this, he wasn't aware that Nora was sneaking up behind him. As Nora snuck up on Granite, though, the alarms rang again. The alarms caused the lights in the hallway to glow red. The red glow coming from the hallway behind Granite revealed Nora's silhouette. Granite immediately spun around to see Nora paused in fear. Granite then took out his pistol and smacked Nora in the side of her head with it, knocking her unconscious before pulling the trigger, sounding her cannon. As Nora's cannon sounded, it came to Granite and the audience's attention that it was down to just him and the sniper, Skylar Bishop, son of famed Victor Abutalon Bishop, victor of the 184th Hunger Games. As President Belladonna Caliban announced this, Granite snuck up to where Skylar was. After the president got off of the comms, Granite stealthily got up to where Skylar was. As Skylar looked in the direction of Granite, he immediately saw Granite aiming at him with his pistol. Skylar then sighed, throwing his sniper to the side, suggesting the boys go hand to hand in order to make it more fair for the pair. Granite would actually end up agreeing to this, throwing his pistol off of the watchtower. As the boys ran at each other, Granite picked up a brick from the ground, causing Skylar to do the same. As Granite and Skylar met in the middle of the watchtower, Granite swung his brick into the side of Skylar's head, making him bleed. Granite would then say something that he would live to regret for the year he lived after his games. And that's the racist comment. I'm not gonna read it. You can read it. This borderline racist comment from Granite pissed off both Skylar and Boutalon himself, along with most other victors and all other District 11 citizens and black citizens all over Pan Am. As Granite prepared to bring his brick into the side of Skylar's head again, Skylar ran at Granite and tackled him to the ground. Granite would then hit Skylar in the side of the head again, breaking his skull. As Skylar fell off of Granite and his cannon sounded, Granite smiled, having made it out of the 204th Hunger Games. When his victory was announced, no one was happy about it, not even the capital. After the games, Granite went through 5 assassination attempts. One of these attempts was in his home district during his victory tour. Another was in District 5 during his victory tour. Districts 2 and 11 also tried to take Granite's life during his victory tour, along with the capital. Eventually, after only 1 year of him living after his victory, a District 2 boy named Hyperion Paddock had finally successfully assassinated Granite, to the surprise of literally no one. When peacekeepers found out it was Hyperion, they didn't arrest him, instead congratulating him on finally killing Granite. For the 205th Games, as this was the 26th quinquennial quell, President Belladonna Caliban made a live appearance on Capitol TV. After applause in Snow Square, President Caliban bowed and announced that in order to remind the districts that they fought with their families during the dark days, the Reap tributes will have his or her entire family, directly related and not extended family, join them. After last year's games, the capital wanted more interesting victors. This year's victor would win in a very unconventional way after the trackers and health monitors failed in the arena. These are the mentors for the 205th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a swamp. The weather was light rain, the main event was a flood, the games lasted for 19 days, and the notable nuts were bloodthirsty crocodiles. This year's victor was 24-year-old Hyperion Paddock from District 2. Hyperion was the older brother of this year's Reaped female tribute, Nyla Paddock, age 15. This year, much like the 203rd Hunger Games, it was made evident during training that the Outlier Pack would be the strongest this year, even though it just contains the tributes from Districts 9 and 11. When the gong sounded, Hyperion ran into the cornucopia with the other careers, and Demeter from 9, Phocacia from 9, Grainley from 9, Hazel from 9, Heather from 9, Corazon from 9, Lilith from 9, Faro from 9, Flower from 9, Fonio from 9, Haro from 9, Jericho from 9, Dill from 11, Dionysia from 11, Eucalypta from 11, Dolly from 11, Flo from 11, Fuchsia from 11, Dylan from 11, Arameris from 11, Andy from 11, and Kafir from 11. As Hyperion arrived at the cornucopia, he grabbed a sword and immediately turned and decapitated Kafir, the father of the Reaped boy from District 11, Dylan. As Hyperion met with his family, Nyla, Ignatius, aged 18, Indra, aged 22, Jason, aged 49, Sabrina, aged 50, and Valeria, aged 67. Hyperion and his family then turned on the other family reaped from District 2 this year, the Darwin family. The only two people they kept alive from the Darwin family were the reaped boy, Blaine, aged 16, and his older sister, Vesma, aged 20. The only reason behind keeping this pair alive, specifically, was because Nyla had a crush on Blaine and Hyperion had a crush on Vesma. The tributes from 2 then met back up with the tributes from 1, and they all ran away from the cornucopia, leaving the cornucopia to be taken by the 9s and 11s. As the day went on, the remaining careers feared the outliers. On the dawn of the 18th day, the career group had been found by the outlier group, and most of both groups were slaughtered before both groups retreated. This attack left the careers with only the 6-year-old sister of the reaped from District 1, Tiffany, along with Vesma, Blaine, Hyperion, Nyla, Indra, Jason, and Sabrina. As the group laid down to sleep that night, they heard something in the distance. Trees were crashing down by the sounds of things. Just then, a huge wave of water crashed into the clearing the group was in, sweeping up all of the careers. As Hyperion surfaced, he saw a tree that was left standing nearby and grabbed onto it, beginning to climb up the tree. He then looked back towards the water, just in time to hear multiple cannons. Some of these cannons belonged to the rest of the living members of Hyperion's family, along with Tiffany and many more. As Hyperion watched, Vesma and Blaine surfaced nearby. As Vesma swam with the current and grabbed onto a nearby tree, Blaine swam against the current, trying to reach the tree that Hyperion was on. As he was about to reach Hyperion's tree, Blaine was dragged under the water by the undercurrent of the water. As Hyperion saw this, he immediately thought about Nyla and Vesma, and what the pair would want him to do. Then, as Vesma screamed, Hyperion dived into the water, going under to see if he could find Blaine. As Vesma looked on in fear, Hyperion eventually surfaced, with Blaine holding on tightly to him. The pair would then grab onto a nearby tree, the tree being right next to the tree Vesma was on. As the pair climbed the tree, they noticed a tree branch on their tree that was close enough to a branch on Vesma's tree to jump across from tree to tree. When the pair got to the top of the tree, they told Vesma this, and she nodded, climbing down to the branch with the boys watching closely. As the boys watched, Vesma skillfully balances on the tree branch. Walking to the end of the branch, she then jumped to the other branch. As she landed, though, she tripped and grabbed onto the edge of the branch. Dangling from the branch as crocodiles swarmed the bottom of the tree, waiting for Vesma to fall. As Vesma screamed and begged one of the boys to come down and help her, Blaine decided to jump down and help Vesma out. Blaine would slide down the tree trunk down to the branch that Vesma was dangling from, as Hyperion watched from the top of the tree. Hyperion was smart to have chosen to stay at the top of the tree, as he would soon learn. As Blaine got towards the end of the branch snapped, letting Vesma and Blaine fall back into the water. Their cannons only sounded once the crocodiles had started to eat them. After the 18th day, it was down to the top two. The top two consisted of Hyperion from 2 and Haro from 9. As the pair realized this, Hyperion saw Haro on top of the cornucopia and slowly slinked down to a branch that went from tree to tree all the way to the cornucopia. As Hyperion jumped from tree to tree and Haro watched, the crocodiles swam along with Hyperion, hoping he would fall so they could eat. As Hyperion was one tree away from the cornucopia, Haro and the crocodiles knew he wouldn't fall. All Hyperion had to do was complete one more jump and he'd be right where Haro stood. As Hyperion arrived on top of the cornucopia, he took out his sword as Haro took out his knife. As Haro did this, Hyperion joked, "Haven't you ever heard the saying, 'Don't bring a knife to a sword fight'?" To which Haro replied by asking, "Isn't the saying, 'Don't bring a gun to a sword fight'?" As Haro was distracted, correcting Hyperion, Hyperion ran at Haro, tackling him and pinning him down on the roof of the cornucopia, starting to choke him out. As Haro tried to get Hyperion off of him, it just wasn't enough. Eventually, Haro's cannon sounded, making Hyperion the victor. After his games, Hyperion canceled his own victory tour and victor's interviews, stating that without his family and his crush, there was no point in pretending to be happy when he wasn't. After a few months, he joined the Victor Therapy Group, being helped out by Aesion Blanken, victor of the 182nd Hunger Games, Aluma Bates, victor of the 186th Hunger Games, Angel Horowitz, victor of the 191st Hunger Games, and Anti-Man Westinghouse, victor of the 195th Hunger Games. Eventually, Hyperion would meet a capital girl by the name of Lydia Canville. For more information on future head game maker Lydia Canville, see File 250. Hyperion and Lydia would begin dating during the 210th Hunger Games, getting married during the 215th Hunger Games. Lydia and Hyperion would end up having 10 kids together, 9 girls and a boy. The boy and one of the girls would end up competing in a future games and being the last 2 killed tributes that year. After last year's games, the capital wanted more female victors. Unluckily for the capital, they weren't about to get a female victor. This year, Districts 1 and 6 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 5 and 12 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. These are all the mentors for the 206th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in the island of the giant bugs. The weather was a downpour of rain, the main event was a flood, the games lasted for 4 days, and the notable months were giant bugs. This year's victor was 17-year-old Athens Carlisle from District 6. During the bloodbath, Athens ran into the cornucopia with his sister, America, aged 15, and his girlfriend, Araba, aged 18. When he arrived at the cornucopia, he grabbed a knife, while America grabbed a spear, and Araba grabbed a trident. As the trio looked around, Illumina from 1 tried to sneak up behind America. At the last moment, America heard Illumina and turned around, stabbing Illumina in the heart with her spear. Meanwhile, Athens immediately started killing. When he first grabbed the knife, he saw Maximilian from 2 grabbing a sword. Before Maximilian could grab this sword, however, Athens slit Maximilian's throat before putting the knife in his pocket and stealing the sword, using it to decapitate the boy from 3, the girl from 5, and the girl from 7. As the bloodbath went on, the careers started to fear the trio from 6. Although they didn't have any other allies, the 6s were doing considerable damage to the playing field. After the bloodbath, 15 tributes had already died, most being killed by the tributes from 6, as Athens, America, and Araba ran away from the cornucopia after the bloodbath. The girls mocked the careers, and Athens didn't really do anything to stop them. On the dawn of the 3rd day, all 3 members of the District 6 Alliance were still left alive. The fear of the 6s was shared by every living tribute, even the careers. In a moment of unexpected cooperation, the careers and the eights agreed to ally together to take down the sixes. By the end of the third day, the big group of careers and eights finally met up with the sixes. Both sides take out their weapons in preparation for a big battle. As the battle went on, Athens managed to overpower both eights and the girl from 2, killing all 3 of them in one solid swing of his sword. Meanwhile, America was able to kill the boy from 1 and the girl from 4 before being killed by the girl from 10. As Athens and Araba saw America get killed by Helena, aged 18, Araba had just finished killing the boy from 10. At that point, Athens and Araba ran at Helena. Together, the pair overpowered Helena, killing her and sending the remaining careers running. At this point, it was down to the top 9. The top 9 consisted of Gem from 1, Mizzen from 4, Athens from 6, Araba from 6, Kiefer from 7, Jasmine from 11, Kuwait from 12, Jonas from 12, and Livia from 12. As this was realized by all remaining tributes, Jasmine decided to face up against the sixes, hoping she'd be able to take them down. Jasmine was unaware of the battle that the sixes just went through and won against the careers and the eights. As Athens watched the camp, he saw a shadow off in the distance. Just then, Jasmine burst through the tree line, tackling Athens to the ground. She would glare into Athens' eyes as she choked him out. Just then, as Athens was about to lose consciousness, a giant spine that was thought to have been a tree by many other tributes who saw it, stabbed through Jasmine's back, sounding her cannon. Athens shot up from the ground to see a gigantic spider right above him. He screamed and woke Araba up. The pair then ran away from the cornucopia, being chased by the gigantic spider and huge ants. As Athens and Araba got to the cornucopia and climbed on top of it, 3 cannons sounded in the distance, belonging to all the tributes from 12. As these cannons sounded, Gem, Mizzen, and Kiefer burst into the cornucopia clearing, being chased by massive wasps and bees. As the 3 remaining careers saw the sixes on top of the cornucopia, it struck fear into the career trio, who had hoped that the cannon that had sounded earlier had belonged to one of them. Athens and Araba then watched as the wasps and bees turned around and went back into the forest as Gem, Mizzen, and Kiefer climbed onto the cornucopia. As Gem was about to make it onto the cornucopia, Kiefer grabbed her and threw her backwards before dropping his sword onto her, stabbing her in the heart. At this point, as Mizzen and Kiefer got up on top of the cornucopia, it was clear that these tributes were the last tributes alive, the top 4 consisting of Mizzen from 4, Araba from 6, Athens from 6, and Kiefer from 7. As Mizzen saw this, he slit his own throat, knowing he wouldn't be able to take down the sixes, leaving just Araba, Athens, and Kiefer. As the trio of remaining tributes glared at each other, an explosion was heard in the distance. This distracted Kiefer for just long enough for Athens to tackle him to the ground and decapitate him. Athens and Araba then looked at each other, being genuinely sad that it was them as the final 2. Neither of them wanted to kill each other, but it was the only option to get out of the arena for both of them. As Athens took out his sword and Araba reluctantly took out a trident, Athens and Araba burst into tears as they began fighting. Both tributes took major blows, but it was eventually Athens who inflicted the lethal wound, stabbing Araba in the heart. Araba's death would be quick after this stab, not giving Athens enough time to say goodbye. As peacekeepers came into the arena to collect Athens, he lifted his sword up to his throat. Before he could slide the sword across his throat, he hesitated. This moment of hesitation was long enough for the peacekeepers to get him and stop him, taking him to the hovercraft to take him out of the arena. After the games, Athens was kept under constant suicide watch by peacekeepers for 24 months, making sure Athens was 100% okay before letting him go free. This would cause both his victory tour and Victor's interview to be cancelled, along with Australis needing to mentor the District 6 males for those 2 years. When Athens was freed, he moved to District 9, the only district that didn't send a tribute who he killed. After Athens' 21st birthday, he met 29-year-old Semolina Spelt. The pair would start dating the next year and would marry the next year after that. Athens would end up having 3 kids with Semolina, 2 girls and a boy, in that exact order. They had the girls within 11 months of each other, the first one being born after Athens turned 22, and the other being born before he turned 23. The boy would be born after Athens had turned 24. The boy would live on to be the last killed tribute in a later games. After last year's games, the capital was getting tired of all these male victors. Unluckily for the capital, this trend would not end this year. This year, Districts 14 and 15 were picked out of both bowls, meaning they'd send in extra tributes of both genders. Here are all the mentors of the 207th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a crater lake. The weather was rain, there was no main event, the games lasted for a day, and there were no notable mutts. This year's victor was 17-year-old Gromit Jaworski from District 9. Before the games began, Gromit had managed to get himself an alliance with the 4s this year, Kailani from 4 and Loach from 4, along with the extra tributes from both Districts 14 and 15. Beth from 14, Patrick from 14, Kareen from 15, and Uzman from 15. As the tributes were lifted into the arena, Gromit immediately noticed the water and knew that the capital had made this arena to be in favor of the 4s. The capital figured that Gromit would keep Kailani and Loach alive for these games, thinking he'd want them alive. So, when Gromit grabbed a sword and immediately decapitated Loach and threw the sword into Kailani's back during the bloodbath, to say the capital was surprised would be an understatement. As Gromit turned to hopefully reunite with Beth, Patrick, Kareen, and Uzman, he saw Uzman and Beth being killed by the 13-year-old girl from 1, Chroma. He also saw the already dead bodies of Patrick and Kareen having been killed by Bia from 2. Seeing this would cause Gromit to run away from the cornucopia, finding a nice little secluded area away from everyone else. Here, Gromit would live off the land, having found the perfect area for food, water, and other basic survival needs. After only a few hours, it was down to the top 2. The top 2 consist of Chroma from 1 and Gromit from 9. After Gromit had remembered that the other tribute he had to fight had killed his allies, this angered him and he ran directly for the cornucopia. As Gromit arrived at the cornucopia, he glared at Chroma. The pair had angry looks plastered on their faces, ready to fight each other. As the pair glared at each other, Gromit made the first move. Gromit would tackle Chroma to the ground and begin beating the life out of her. Chroma would scream out for mercy, but the screams fell on deaf ears as Gromit just beat her to death with his own fists, making him the victor. After the games, Gromit returned to the capital to cheers from the capital crowd. Although he was the 7th male victor in a row, he was also the first D9 victor of the 3rd century. Gromit was loved throughout Panem, especially in districts 9, 14, and 15. His intelligence and the way he avenged his allies from 14 and 15 really brought love to Gromit from districts 14 and 15. Eventually, Gromit would move to district 15. It was here that Gromit would meet the love of his life and sister of Corinne, Stephanie Anjou, age 20. Although Gromit hadn't turned 18 yet at the time, he still tried his luck with Stephanie, although Stephanie told him that she wouldn't date him until after he turned 18. Gromit still took this as a win. After Gromit turned 18, he and Stephanie ended up dating. After 3 years of dating, Gromit and Stephanie would get married and have 6 kids together. 3 boys and 3 girls. Their sons, Philip, Raphael, and Theo, would grow up to become part of future head game maker Kimberly Hightower's game-making team. Meanwhile, their daughters, Marie, Valerie, and Victory, would grow to become lead stylists for districts 9, 14, and 15 respectively. After last year's games, the capital lost hope in getting a female victor, in this decade at least. This year's victor was a highly loved career victor, being from an often overlooked family within his home district. This year, districts 3 and 5 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and districts 7 and 10 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. These are the mentors for the 208th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a toy factory. There was no weather, because it's inside. The main event was a shelf collapse. The games lasted for 3 days, and there were no notable mutts. The victor this year was 17-year-old Mateo Gutierrez from District 10. When the gong sounded, Mateo ran into the cornucopia with his fellow careers and grabbed a sword, immediately turning to the girl from 15 and decapitating her. As Mateo turned to the boy from 14 and began fighting him, the boy from 2 was the first of many careers to try and assassinate Mateo. The boy from 2 tried to sneak up on Mateo with his trident, but a misplaced toy fire truck caused the boy to trip and fall right between Mateo and the boy from 14. As Mateo saw the boy from 2 fall in front of him, he easily stabbed the boy in the heart before turning back to the boy from 14 and stabbing him in the stomach, tearing his intestines out of his body. After killing the boy from 14, Mateo turned back to the other careers to see Luna from 7 running at him. When Luna got to Mateo, they began to fight. As Luna and Mateo fought, Beryl from 7 joined in on the fight. The pair from 7 tried their best to kill Mateo, but Mateo was too fast and strong for the pair, being able to dodge all of their attacks before skillfully decapitating both tributes with one swipe of his sword. As Mateo killed Luna and Beryl, Hickory from 7 watched. Once Mateo was finished, Hickory ran at him, actually managing to hit Mateo before he could turn around to fight him. Just like Luna and Beryl, though, Mateo was too fast and too strong for Hickory to finish the job, being finished off by Mateo. After killing the trio from 7, he ran away from the cornucopia, letting his district partners get killed by Florentine from 1. That night, as Mateo watched the fallen being shown in the sky, he noticed just how bad the bloodbath was earlier. The portraits of the girl from 1, the boy from 2, the boy from 3, the extra girl from 3, the extra girl from 5, the girl from 6, Luna from 7, Boreal from 7, Hickory from 7, the girl from 8, the girl from 10, the extra boy from 10, the boy from 11, the boy from 14, and the girl from 15 were shown in the sky. After the fallen was shown, Matteo correctly counted that there were still 17 tributes left, including Florentine and Matteo. Once Matteo had realized this, a tribute jumped out from around a corner and tackled Matteo to the ground. This tribute was the girl from 3, Iona. As Iona and Matteo struggled on the ground, Iona's allies, Galatea from 5, Galileo from 5, Fayette from 6, and Jincham from 8, jumped from around the corner and cheered for Iona. Just then, Matteo stabbed his sword up into Iona's heart, causing her to fall off of him and her cannon to sound. This angered Galileo, and he ran at Matteo. All Matteo had to do was put his sword out in front of him, and Matteo ran directly into it, impaling himself. As Galatea saw her boyfriend Galileo getting killed, she ran at Matteo. Unlike Galileo, Galatea didn't fall for the trick, managing to stop just before running into Matteo's sword. The pair then fought as Fayette and Jincham contemplated joining the fight. Eventually, Matteo had Galatea on the ground, choking her out. This is when Fayette and Jincham decided to make a run for it, retreating away from the fight. As Galatea's cannon sounded, Matteo noticed Fayette and Jincham trying to retreat. This caused Matteo to pick up his sword and throw it directly into Jincham's back, allowing Fayette to escape as Matteo ran to grab his sword. This fight left just 13 tributes remaining by night 2. At midnight, Matteo scanned the area around his camp before deciding to get some sleep. His mentors, Briscoe Burnett, victor of the 169th Hunger Games, Wolfmark Saunders, victor of the 189th Hunger Games, and Anastasia Chavez, victor of the 189th Hunger Games, thought that this wasn't smart. But when he survived the rest of night 2, without a scratch, his mentors knew they taught him well. By the time the third day arrived, because of kills that occurred during the second night while Matteo was asleep, only 5 tributes remained. These 5 tributes were Florentine from 1, Gloria from 2, Jincham from 6, Harvest from 9, and Matteo from 10. As Matteo started to wake up, he heard a sound in the distance. It sounded like a huge bang. Just then, he saw a nearby shelf collapse, causing him to get up and begin to run away. As Matteo ran, he heard 2 cannons sounding in the distance, as Gloria and Harvest were crushed by collapsing shelves. As Matteo got to the cornucopia, he saw Florentine and Jincham fighting. To Matteo's surprise, he watches Jincham manage to kill Florentine. This is when Matteo jumped out of hiding and prepared his sword to fight against Jincham. Matteo was struck by surprise when Jincham actually managed to inflict a painful wound on Matteo. Not deadly, though. As the pair continued to fight, both tributes inflicted painful wounds on each other until Matteo finally stabbed Jincham right between his ribs. As Jincham fell to the ground, he begged Matteo to put him out of his misery. Matteo would nod and put his hand on Jincham's shoulder before stabbing Jincham in the throat, sounding his cannon. After the games, Matteo returned home to District 10, where he was celebrated for bringing District 10 its first official male District 10 victor. Meanwhile, the capital was getting tired of the male victors. Some capital citizens even opting not to watch the games anymore. Matteo would eventually meet the love of his life, Camila Gonzalez. Camila and Matteo would end up getting married during the 212th Hunger Games, after the pair had turned 21. The pair would then go on to have 16 kids together, 15 girls and a boy. The boy, being named Diego, would go on to be the last killed tribute in a later games. After last year's games, the capital was getting tired of the repeated male victors. Viewership of the Hunger Games started to take a dive this year, only getting worse after the victor was crowned. This year, Districts 8 and 14 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 2 and 6 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. This is the mentors for the 209th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a dark factory. Though there was no weather, the main event was blinding lights, the games lasted for 2 days, and there were no notable mutts. This year's victor was 18-year-old Oasis Irving from District 4. Before the games, Oasis had gotten super close to Trinity from 3 and Queenie from 6. By the end of training, the trio agreed to form an alliance in the arena, and a lot of the capital shipped the trio together. This ship would become the main drawing point for many capital viewers, although many of these capital viewers still wished for a female victor. When the gong sounded, Trinity and Queenie ran away from the cornucopia while Oasis ran in, as previously discussed by the trio during training. When Oasis arrived in the cornucopia, he grabbed a trident and immediately turned and stabbed his district partner in the heart with it. After doing this, Oasis turned and grabbed a backpack along with knives and throwing knives. He then put these knives into the backpack and ran away from the cornucopia to meet up with Trinity and Queenie. After Oasis met up with Trinity and Queenie, Oasis gave Trinity the knives and gave Queenie the throwing knives. The girls would gratefully accept these weapons before they both kissed Oasis on the cheek. This caused Oasis to blush, which the girls thought was cute. Later that night, as the fallen was being shown in the sky, Trinity and Queenie would kiss Oasis, and the trio would start to get intimate that night. This slightly random moment of intimacy reminded Capitalites of the instances created by recent seduction victors in order to get their kills. Instead of killing Oasis, though, Trinity and Queenie were actually just wanting to get intimate with him. The next day was already down to the top 5. The top 5 consisted of Moonshine from 1, Trinity from 3, Oasis from 4, Queenie from 6, and Sterling from 14. All of the surviving tributes were in relationships with other surviving tributes. Moonshine and Sterling's relationship being more of a parasitic relationship, with Moonshine being the one who benefited from it. As the tributes started to wake up, they all saw a blinding light leaking into the factory. All the living tributes could hear each other's screams of pain and agony, although Moonshine got the worst of it. As Moonshine tried to open her eyes to see, as soon as she saw the light, her eyes popped from inside her skull and her cannon sounded. Oasis, Trinity, and Queenie heard Sterling's screams as he felt Moonshine's blood squirt onto him. As the trio heard this, they began to run to where they thought the cornucopia was. As Oasis, Trinity, and Queenie arrived at the cornucopia, Queenie thought she'd be able to open her eyes. As soon as light leaked into her vision, though, Queenie's eyes popped as well, sounding her cannon. This caused Oasis and Trinity to scream, and Trinity even burst into tears. As Sterling arrived at the cornucopia, the light dissipated, and all 3 of the remaining tributes opened their eyes, noticing they were back in the darkness. As the trio's eyes adjusted, they noticed that they were looking at the final 3 tributes. As Oasis and Trinity noticed that they only had to fight Sterling in order to get to the final two together, Oasis and Trinity both began running towards Sterling. As the pair ran at Sterling, he glared at the pair and took out his sword, as Trinity took out her knives and Oasis took out his trident. Oasis and Trinity then both jumped onto Sterling, knocking him down onto the ground. As Oasis and Sterling struggled on the floor, Trinity waited for an opening. Once Trinity saw an opening, he stabbed Sterling in the heart, sounding his cannon. This allowed Oasis to get back up on his feet. As Oasis stood back up, Trinity frowned. As Oasis noticed it was down to just him and Trinity, he walked over to Trinity and kissed her one last time. He then stated that Trinity deserved to win, dropping his trident to let her kill him. Just then, to the surprise of the entire capital, even Oasis, Trinity smiled faintly at Oasis before slitting her own throat. This caused Oasis to burst into tears, holding Trinity's body close in his arms as peacekeepers came to collect him. After the games, Oasis was held under house arrest for suicide watch. Here, he would meet a pair of twin girls named Hopeland and Gracelyn Gall. The Gall twins were very popular within the capital, said to be the prettiest girls in the capital. The Gall twins would eventually manage to get Oasis's mind off of Trinity and Queenie, managing to get him to think of someone else entirely. Them. After a few years, Oasis finally asked the Gall twins out on a date, to which they actually accepted. The trio would end up having 20 kids in total. Oasis and Hopeland having 14 kids, 13 boys and a girl, while Oasis and Gracelyn would end up having 6 kids, 5 girls and a boy. All of these kids would end up being famous figures within the capital, all being polyamorous just like their parents. For the 210th games, as this was the 27th quinquennial Quell, President Belladonna Caliban made a live appearance on Capitol TV. After applause in Snow Square, President Caliban bowed and announced that in order to remind the districts that they chose to rebel and even had other people choose to join them, the first 2 reaped tributes will choose a 3rd tribute to join them, needing to agree 100%. After last year's games, the Capitol viewership was at an all-time low, and President Belladonna Caliban was desperate to get viewership back up to higher levels. These are the mentors for the 210th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a junkyard. The weather was rain. The main event was a junk pile collapse. The games lasted for 7 days, and the notable mutts were roaches. This year's victor was 16-year-old Frere Clark from District 5. This year, due to how the Quell twist was announced, it caused confusion around the districts, and a common question arose. What if the 2 reaped tributes couldn't agree? In District 5, Frere's ex-girlfriend Hermione and her boyfriend Eos were reaped, and they immediately agreed on who they would pick to join them. This pair had picked Frere due to the fact that this was only 3 months after Frere and Hermione's breakup, and so Hermione and Eos both thought his feelings on the scenario would make him weak and not much of a threat in the arena. On the first day in the arena, Frere already did what he needed to do during the bloodbath. It was revealed during Hermione's interview that she cheated on Frere with Eos, and that she never truly loved Frere. This notably angered Frere while he was backstage. Now, in the arena, he was even angrier and wanted to exact revenge. When the gong sounded, Frere ran into the cornucopia and immediately grabbed a set of throwing knives, throwing one knife into Hermione's back and throwing another knife into Eos's back. As the pair fell down right next to each other, Freyr stood over them. He then stated, "So much for not being a threat," before stabbing both of them to death, starting with Eos and ending with Hermione. After doing this, Freyr then met up with the Eights and ran away from the cornucopia. As the week went on, Freyr and Grace from 8 got along well, especially considering the fact that both of them were chosen to compete by the reaped tributes. On the second day, Freyr and Grace would be caught up in a heated debate before Grace kissed Freyr to get him to shut up. On the third day, Hancock from 8 and Fuchsia from 8 told Freyr and Grace that they were going to go hunting. About halfway through the day, as Freyr and Grace were talking and laughing together, they heard a scream nearby. As Freyr and Grace looked towards where the scream came from, Fuchsia ran back into the camp. She tried to warn Freyr and Grace, but she wasn't fast enough, as the careers came into the camp as well. To the surprise of the Capitol viewers, and even the careers, Freyr instructed Fuchsia and Grace to run away, and that he would deal with the careers. As the girls ran away, Freyr prepared his throwing knives and glared at Garrick from 7. As Freyr threw his knife into Garrick's heart, sounding his cannon, Deli from 12 tackled Freyr to the ground, pickaxe in hand. Just then, Hancock ran into the camp and tackled Deli off of Freyr. Freyr would then stab Deli in the back before helping Hancock up. The pair would then glare at the remaining careers. At this point, the careers were still feeling arrogant and didn't think that Freyr and Hancock were very strong competition. Just then, Fletch from 12 and Diego from 10 ran at Freyr and Hancock. As Freyr saw Fletch running at him, he threw a throwing knife at him. As Fletch dodged Freyr's knife, Freyr threw a second knife directly into Fletch's heart, sounding his cannon. Meanwhile, Diego tackled Hancock to the ground and brutally stabbed him to death with the sais he had grabbed from the cornucopia. This angered Freyr, and he couldn't do much at the moment, and he would retreat from the fight, making the careers laugh. On the dawn of the 7th day, it was down to the top 7. The top 7 consisted of Dazzle from 1, Estate from 1, Felicia from 2, Jinx from 3, Freyr from 5, Fuchsia from 8, and Grace from 8. This left just 3 careers, 3 anti-careers, and 1 solo tribute. When Freyr and Grace realized that they were in the final 7, they thought about turning on Fuchsia for a moment, but ultimately turned it down in order to have the numbers to face up against the careers. The pair would then talk to Fuchsia about a plan for the finale. As the group talked about their plan, they heard something falling close by. Just then, a nearby pile of junk within the group's line of sight collapsed, causing the group to break into a panic and begin to run. As the group ran, they heard multiple cannons sounding in the distance. Just then, Freyr and Grace heard a cannon right behind them. The pair would look behind them to see that Fusion had been crushed by a junk pile. This only caused Freyr and Grace to run faster. When Freyr and Grace got to the cornucopia, a bruised and bloodied girl arrived at the cornucopia. Freyr and Grace hadn't seen this girl since training. It was evident when she arrived that Jinx from 3, Freyr from 5, and Grace from 8 had made it to the top 3. The trio would look between each other before Grace ran at Jinx and tackled her to the ground, stabbing her in the throat, sounding her cannon. Grace then got up and looked at Freyr with a small smirk on her face. She then muttered to Freyr that the capital deserved a female victor before running at Freyr. As Grace ran at Freyr, all Freyr could do was put his arms out by his sides and accept his fate. As Grace continued to run at Freyr, he put his arms out, but his death didn't come. Freyr opened his eyes to see Grace stopped right in front of Freyr, hesitating. Freyr would ask Grace what was wrong before Grace bursted into tears, saying that she couldn't kill Freyr, admitting that she had grown actual feelings for Freyr. Freyr would hug Grace before kissing her on the forehead and telling Grace to go ahead and kill him, admitting that all he wanted to do after he was chosen was exact his revenge on Hermione and Eos. Now that he had done that, his mission in the games was complete. As Freyr closed his eyes and put his arms out to his side in surrender again, a cannon was heard, but it wasn't his. Freyr opened his eyes. As Freyr opened his eyes, he saw that Grace had slit her own throat and was lying on the ground dead. This caused Freyr to actually start crying, holding Grace's body close in a scene reminiscent of the end of the previous Hunger Games, until peacekeepers came to collect him from the arena. After the games, much like Oasis had been, Freyr was held under house arrest under suicide. Unlike Oasis, Freyr would move back to District 5 after his house arrest, meeting a girl named Adalia von Beatra. Freyr and Adalia would end up marrying each other 5 years after Freyr's victory at the age of 21. This pair would go on to have 4 children together, 2 girls and 2 boys. Both girls would grow up to be part of a future game making team, while the boys would become part of the stylist team for District 8. Every now and then, Freyr would have intense nightmares about what had happened in the arena until the nightmares gave him a major heart attack that would take Freyr's life at the age of 40, being replaced as the male mentor by the most recent female victor at the time, Cuff Larson, victor of the 232nd Hunger Games. After last year's games, only 65 Capital viewers viewed this year's games, hoping for a female victor. Unluckily for the Capital viewers this year, the trend of male victors was not yet ended this year. This year, Districts 5 and 12 were picked to send in the extra male tributes, and Districts 9 and 15 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. These are the mentors for the 211th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a tropical island. The weather was thunderstorms. The main event was a tornado. The games lasted for 3 days, and there were no notable nuts. The victor this year was 14-year-old Sacro Donner from District 12. Sacro was the youngest tribute this year, having just turned 14 a few days before the games. When he had won the race and prevailed in the interviews, he was crowned as the male tribute for District 12. The idea of him winning would be a laughable matter. When the gong sounded, Sacro immediately ran into the cornucopia and grabbed a pickaxe. He had promised that he would stick with the careers and even promised to protect Rhaenyra from Tem. But instead, after grabbing the pickaxe, he retreated from the cornucopia, letting Mohair from 8 kill Rhaenyra with a sewing needle. As the days went on, a tornado and an earthquake happened on different days, killing a lot of the tributes between them. On the dawn of the 3rd day, it was down to the top 5. The top 5 consisted of Mohair from 8, Laurel from 11, Nolan from 11, Sacro from 12, and Ariane from 15. All of these 5 tributes were soloists, with Mohair having the most kills out of all of them. As Sacro realized this, he knew what the capital was going to do, that the capital was going to do whatever they had to in order to get the remaining tributes back to the cornucopia, and so he immediately began running, making it to the cornucopia within the hour. As Sacro arrived at the cornucopia, he didn't see anyone there yet, and so he decided to climb on top of the cornucopia and hide. From the top of the cornucopia, Sacro had the perfect vantage point to see as other tributes approached. The first tribute to arrive at the cornucopia was Mohair, looking around for the other tributes. As Mohair did this, Sacro noticed Ariane trying to sneak up on Mohair. Sacro and the capital audience went deathly silent as they watched, hoping for Ariane to kill Mohair. As Ariane finally got up behind Mohair and stabbed him in the back, impaling him, sounding his cannon, Laurel stood up behind Sacro, swinging her sword at him. Sacro would easily dodge this attack, rolling over to the side. Meanwhile, down on the ground, Nolan had begun fighting Ariane. As Sacro kept fighting Laurel, the capital could tell Laurel was losing steam. After only a few seconds of battle, Laurel had lost all the will to fight, finally allowing Sacro to kill her. As Sacro killed Laurel, Nolan killed Ariane, making the final 2 just boys. At this point, most Capital viewers tuned out of the games, not wanting to see 2 boys battle it out for victory. Sacro would jump down from on top of the cornucopia, knocking Nolan to the ground. Sacro would then stay on top of Nolan and try to stab him. But Nolan held the pickaxe just inches away from his face. Eventually, Nolan's muscles would give way, and Sacro brought his pickaxe down into Nolan's brain. He then took the pickaxe out of Nolan's brain, only to ram it back into his brain repeatedly, sounding his cannon. As peacekeepers came to collect Sacro, it was a notably bloody sight, seeing the brutally torn apart body of Laurel and the torn open head of Nolan. There was blood all over Sacro's arena uniform, and Sacro was notably smiling about the whole situation. After the games, Sacro was put into an insane asylum. This placement was only temporary, as he had shown significant growth after the first 3 years of him being there, and so he was released on good behavior. After Sacro was released from the insane asylum, he moved back to District 12, where he would begin flirting with some girls he had met in school, Cure and Curel, Diggs. This trio would end up dating, and when the trio turned 18, they got married. Curel and Sacro would end up having 2 kids together, a girl and a boy. Meanwhile, Cure and Sacro would end up having 3 kids, a girl and 2 boys. All of these kids would go on to be future tributes in future games. Both boys would go on to be the last killed tribute in the games they competed in, while one of the girls would actually go on to win a future games. After last year's games, only 50 Capital viewers tuned in. Even district viewership started to fall off this year, with even the peacekeepers in the district starting to be uninterested. This year, the victor would save the Hunger Games, being the first female victor in 11 years. This year, Districts 1 and 7 would be picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 1 and 9 would be picked to send in the extra male tributes. These are the mentors for the 212th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a luxury hotel. There was no weather, because it was inside. The main event was an earthquake. The games lasted for 4 days, and there were no notable nuts. This year's victor was 17-year-old Jade Ferrari from District 1. Before the games, Jade had formed an alliance with Vita from 2, Trivia from 3, Nori from 4, Metra from 5, Ria from 10, Rosa from 11, and Pepper from 12. These girls were all pretty strong and smart, all agreeing that another female victor was needed. When the gong sounded, Jade, Vita, Nori, Ria, and Pepper ran into the cornucopia and started grabbing weapons. Jade immediately went for a sword before turning to the nearest tribute, Montag from 1, and decapitating him. As the bloodbath went on, the kills collected by the All-Girls Alliance were starting to build up steadily. Jade was getting the most kills, having killed Montag from 1, the boy from 2, the boy from 5, the boy from 8, the boy from 9, the boy from 11, the boy from 14, and both tributes from 15. After the bloodbath, as the remaining outliers run away, Jade regrouped with the other girls, seeing that the group had only lost one of their number, Nori. This left 14 girls and 8 boys. This actually gave the capital hope that they would finally get a female victor. By the second day, all the boys had died, and it was just down to the 14 remaining girls. Jade from 1, Larima from 1, Vita from 2, Trivia from 3, Metra from 5, Antari from 6, Natasha from 7, Naomi from 7, Organdy from 8, Sujata from 9, Ria from 10, Rosa from 11, and Pepper from 12, and Isabella from 14. This excited the capital, and more people started tuning in to view the games, ready for this century's first female victor. As the girls were talking and making a plan, during the third day, an earthquake occurred. Jade, Vita, Ria, Rosa, and Pepper would survive this, although Trivia and Metra wouldn't survive it, being crushed by rubble. As the day continued, Jade, Vita, and Pepper would realize how close Ria and Rosa were getting. The trio of girls would smirk at each other before gesturing to Ria and Rosa, whispering that they should set the pair up with each other. About halfway through the day, Jade, Vita, and Pepper all put their plan into effect. Jade and Vita pulled Ria to the side, while Pepper pulls Rosa to the side. It was at this point that Jade, Vita, and Pepper managed to talk Ria and Rosa into admitting that they had feelings for each other. After a few minutes of the groups talking with each other, Jade, Vita, and Pepper forced Ria and Rosa to tell each other about their feelings. As Jade, Vita, and Pepper watched Ria and Rosa talk, Jade glanced multiple times at Pepper. Vita found this weird, but let it continue. While in the capital, Jade's mentors were cheering for Jade to chop Pepper's head off her shoulders. As Jade took one last look at Pepper, a cannon sounded nearby. This cannon belonged to Naomi from 7 after Natasha from 7 turned on her, decapitating her with an axe. This scared most of the career girls, although Jade was still thinking about something that was yet to be revealed. When Ria and Rosa went back over to the other career girls, it was down to the top 10. The top 10 consisted of Jade from 1, Vita from 2, Antari from 6, Natasha from 7, Organdy from 8, Sujata from 9, Ria from 10, Rosa from 11, Pepper from 12, and Isabella from 14. When the career girls realized this, they all except Jade immediately agreed not to kill each other in order to be able to take on the other tributes in the finale. The girls noticed the girls noticed this and asked Jade if she agreed to keep a truce with the other girls, to which Jade snapped out of her state and agreed to the plan with the other girls. After agreeing, though, it was noticed by most of the capital that Jade immediately went silent after agreeing, starting to stare at Pepper again. That night, Jade had the first watch. As Jade stayed up, watching for other tributes, she lost sight of where she was, starting to stare at Pepper again. As Jade stared at Pepper, she was unaware that Isabella was sneaking up on the camp. When Jade looked up from Pepper, she saw a shadow creep across her field of vision. This spooked Jade, and she took her sword out, ready to fight. As Jade looked away from the camp where she saw the shadow, Isabella snuck up behind Jade and stabbed Pepper in the heart, sounding her cannon. This caused Jade to turn around, seeing Isabella. As Jade fought Isabella, Vita, Rhea, and Rosa woke up to see Pepper dead and Jade fighting Isabella. This caused Vita, Rhea, and Rosa to grab their weapons in order to help Jade. Once the group managed to kill Isabella, Vita glared at Jade before asking Jade why the hell Jade wasn't doing her job. This caused Rhea and Rosa to try and walk away before being stopped by Vita, saying that she didn't want to do something stupid. As Jade and Vita argued with each other, Rhea and Rosa heard someone approaching. Just then, Natasha tackled Vita to the ground and decapitated her with her axe. As the girls saw this, they screamed, preparing their weapons. Natasha would smirk at the trio, thinking they wouldn't be able to take her on. As Natasha took her axe out of Vita's body, Rosa tackled Natasha to the ground and attempted to stab her with her knife. As Rosa brought the knife down, though, Natasha laughed and caught the knife. As Rosa and Natasha struggled on the ground, Jade just stood back and watched as Rhea begged her to help take down Natasha. As Natasha managed to get the upper hand and grab her axe and stab Rosa in the neck, Rhea got extremely angry and jumped onto Natasha's back. As Rhea and Natasha fought, Jade finally made a move, throwing her sword into Natasha's arm, causing Natasha to drop her axe and stop fighting for a moment. This moment was long enough for Rhea to get the upper hand and stab Natasha in the neck with her knife. As Natasha fell to the ground and Rhea got off of her back, she glared at Jade before running over to Rosa's dead body and crying next to Rosa's body. This actually made Jade feel bad, but not too bad. By the dawn of the fourth day, it was down to the top 5. The top 5 consisted of Jade from 1, Antari from 6, Organdy from 8, Sujata from 9, and Rhea from 10. Once the top 5 realized they were the top 5, the earth began to shake. As the earth was shaking, loud crashes were heard nearby to the career girls. This caused Jade to run away from the camp, leaving Rhea sleeping in the camp, getting crushed by rubble in the building. As Jade ran to the cornucopia, she heard 3 cannons, including Rhea's. The other 2 cannons belonged to Organdy and Sujata, after being mercilessly murdered by Antari. When Jade arrived at the cornucopia, she was surprised to see Antari already there, waiting for her. As Jade saw Antari, Antari immediately ran at Jade with her knife out. As Jade saw Antari approaching her with her knife, Jade took out her sword, ready to fight. As Antari got close enough, Jade stabbed Antari in the stomach with her sword. Antari immediately fell to the ground, holding her stomach in pain. Jade then got on top of Antari and glared into her eyes before repeatedly stabbing Antari in the stomach, chest, and head, continuing to stab her even after her cannon sounded. She'd only stop stabbing Antari after peacekeepers came to collect Jade from the arena. After the games, Jade returned home to District 1, where she was seen as a hero for bringing home the first female victor of the century. When Jade turned 18, she moved to the capital, where she was seen as a celebrity among celebrities. After Jade turned 21, she met a 30-year-old capital man, Raskus Click. Jade and Raskus would become friends with benefits and would remain friends with benefits even after Jade started dating 23-year-old Venia Crane. Raskus and Jade would end up having only one child together. This child was born before Jade and Venia started dating, but Venia did find it strange. Meanwhile, Jade and Venia ended up adopting 6 children together, 3 boys and 3 girls. None of these children would go on to compete in the future games. Their youngest adopted child, Vivian, died at the age of 13 due to childhood cancer. After last year's games, the capital and district viewership of the games was ramping back up to acceptable numbers by capital standards. They hoped for even more female victors, and luckily, they were going to get some. This year, Districts 10 and 14 would be picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 14 and 15 would be picked to send in the extra male tributes. These are the mentors for the 213th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a cemetery. The weather was light rain. The main event was a ghost invasion. The games lasted for 4 days, and the notable months were ghosts of past tributes. This year's victor was 18-year-old Florentina Castro from District 2. After last year's games, District 2 was hoping to bring this century another female victor. This year, when Florentina volunteered, District 2 immediately saw potential in her to win. When the gong sounded, Florentina immediately ran into the cornucopia and grabbed a bow and arrow, immediately shooting an arrow at the boy from 14. Before turning around and shooting the other boy from 14. After the bloodbath, 14 cannons had already sounded. These cannons belonged to both tributes from 1, the girl from 4, the boy from 5, the girl from 6, the boy from 7, the girl from 8, the boy from 9, the boy from 11, both boys and one of the girls from 14, and both boys from 15. This left 18 tributes remaining, 11 girls and 7 boys. As the career girls regrouped at the cornucopia structure, Icarus from 2 and Pacific from 4 were hiding behind some boxes inside the structure. Unbeknownst to the girls, Icarus and Pacific were grabbing equipment for Hoof from 10 and Lumbar from 12, who had ran away from the bloodbath. As Florentina talked with Ivy from 7, Lisa from 10, and Mina from 12 about how she had mercilessly stabbed Xavier from 15 to death with a knife she had grabbed after shooting the boys from 14 with the arrows, Ivy and Mina told Florentina and Lisa to shut up after having heard something coming from the cornucopia structure. As Florentina and Lisa actually quieted down, Icarus and Pacific jumped out of the structure, scaring the girls off of their feet, allowing Icarus and Pacific to run away. As Florentina got to her feet, she picked up her bow and arrow and shot it in the boy's direction, actually hitting Pacific in the leg, causing Icarus to pick him up and carry him away from the cornucopia. After the pair of boys escaped, Florentina cursed in anger and threw her bow to the ground, storming off to a nearby lake and sitting next to it. A little while later, Lisa came over to Florentina and sat next to her, putting her hand on Florentina's thigh. Lisa would ask Florentina if she was all right, to which Florentina replied that she felt as though she let Lisa down by not killing Pacific. Lisa would giggle at this before mentioning that Florentina didn't let her down. Lisa then kissed Florentina, and the pair of girls began to get intimate, causing the Capitol TV to switch over to the cameras watching the Outlier girls. After a few minutes, Florentina and Lisa reunited with Ivy and Mina. This group would then continue to talk about the kills they had committed during the bloodbath. On the dawn of the third day, it was already down to the top 10. The top 10 consisted of Florentina from 2, Icarus from 2, Mackenzie from 3, Pacific from 4, Ivy from 7, Lisa from 10, Hoof from 10, Mina from 12, Lumbar from 12, and Marie from 15. As the career girls talked about how the group had killed the boy from 8 and the girl from 9 the previous day, Mina would be laughing hysterically about the way the girl from 9 had a terrified look on her face as she fell. This laughing did kinda creep out Florentina, Ivy, and Lisa, but they said nothing about it. As the day went on, Mina went on mocking the tributes they had killed on day 3, and this genuinely started to scare Lisa. It was at that point that Florentina pulled Lisa to the side and decided to run away from Ivy and Mina. Later that day, 2 cannons went off. One of them belonged to Pacific, as the boys ran out of meds, and Pacific finally bled out due to the wound on his leg from the bow. Meanwhile, the other cannon belonged to Marie, who was shot with a poison blow dart by Mackenzie. As these cannons sounded, Florentina and Lisa ran away, the sound of the cannons masking the sound of their footsteps as they ran. When Florentina and Lisa got far enough away from the cornucopia, far enough away from Ivy and Mina, Florentina and Lisa got intimate again for the 3rd time in the games. Later that night, a cold breeze blew over the land and fog clouded the ground. Florentina and Lisa cuddled together for warmth whilst this happened. Just then, Florentina and Lisa heard Mina screaming and her cannon sounding. As this happened, Florentina and Lisa heard screams and cannons sounding all around them. This caused Florentina and Lisa to jump into a nearby bush and in order to hide. As the sun rose on the 4th day, the last scream and cannon sounded as the ghost of Ontari mercilessly killed Ivy, leaving just 3 tributes remaining. These 3 tributes would be Florentina from 2, Mackenzie from 3, and Lisa from 10. Little did Florentina and Lisa know, Mackenzie was hidden in the same bush they were. After a few minutes of Florentina and Lisa watching the cornucopia, Mackenzie grabbed Lisa and pulled her out of the bush, choking her to death right in front of Florentina. As Lisa's cannon sounded, Florentina jumped out of the bush, tearing up as she looked at Lisa's body. She then glared at Mackenzie, taking out her knife. In the span of a second, Florentina stabbed Mackenzie in the heart with her knife, sounding her cannon immediately. As peacekeepers came to collect Florentina from the arena, Florentina fell to her knees next to Lisa's body and held her body close as she cried. Eventually, the peacekeepers arrived and grabbed Florentina, taking her out of the arena. After the games, Florentina was kept on house arrest and close suicide watch for 5 years after her victory. After the 217th Hunger Games, Florentina moved to District 10, starting an orphanage. Florentina would go on to not get with any other girls, instead opting to wait until she reunited with Lisa in the afterlife. Florentina would end up adopting 10 children, 9 girls and a boy. 8 of these girls would go on to compete in future games, 7 of which being the last killed tribute, and the other being the first. So yeah, I think I'm actually going to end this video with that games. Just so that I don't have to worry about it cutting off early again. So yeah, this will be a two-parter. I will do the rest of the games in the next episode. I'll probably record the next part of it later on tonight, either later on tonight or tomorrow night. I will try to get that other part recorded, which will contain the 214th through to the 225th games. Hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, that's what will happen. So anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed part 1 of the 201st to 225th games. Again, I'm ending it now, so it will not, cut off halfway through a game, to the point where I have no idea where it ended. So anyways, yeah, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, then slap that like button. As always, stay awesome. Goodbye, everybody.